Welcome to a new episode of Not Just Any Book Club, where these two guys are going to discuss the coming of age of a young woman from the 1960s, a fictional young woman.
Allegedly a fictional woman.
Or is it the 50s? Is it said the 50s or the
It is the
60s?
50s.
It's the 50s, the 50s, so true.
We read the book, we swear.
Yeah, so we're talking about The Bell Jar.
By Sylvia Plath, which was had an interesting publication history, and this book is also a roman a clef. Is that how you pronounce it? Where it is a nonfiction book or a personal account of a book laid over with fiction. It's an interesting book.
I think it's Clay. Roman
Clay.
Clay. Yeah.
This is off to a great start. Anyways, let's go introduce ourselves. My name is Justin. I read The Bell Jar a couple days ago, not weeks ago.
My name is Pierce. I also read The Bell Jar. A bit longer ago. I finished it a while ago.
All right. So, before we even get into our opinions about the book, let's go talk about the plot and give a firm plot summary. So, The Bell Jar is about Esther Greenwood, a young woman in the 1950s who lives in Boston and attends a summer internship at a magazine company. However, she feels alienated and does not get along with her peers due to her introverted and rather brash nature. She begins to feel insecure about herself and feels as if she should be doing something else. And she describes this awful relationship with a handsome young doctor named Buddy Willard that causes her to become insecure about her own sexuality and pureness. And she rejects everything, including his hand in marriage. She also meets up with a man named Marco who unsuccessfully and thankfully um, as in tries to sexually assault her. It does not work out, and he leaves with a bloody nose. She returns home, but then is told by her mother that she's not accepted into a writing program she really wanted to get into, and then becomes insecure about her own ability to write. She attempts to write a novel about herself, and then she becomes depressed seeing this fig tree in her mind, and she starts lamenting about the fact that she has not had this much life experience. She eventually starts sleeping a lot less, has insomnia, and then she sees a doctor about this who prescribes convulsive therapy, which causes her to become more depressed, and she even attempts suicide many times, culminating in taking sleeping pills and hiding in her own home. She enters an asylum and receives psychotherapy with even more electroconvulsive therapy, which a new doctor, Dr. Nolan, who's a female doctor, says is beneficial. While there, Joan is attending. Her friend from her college days is attending as a patient because she heard about Esther being there in the news, and she also became depressed. Some time passes, and Dr. Nolan gives her some more freedom to live in the world under guidance. She notices Joan in a bed with another woman, which she conclusively decides that she is a lesbian. She has a sexual encounter with a math professor, which helps Joan clean up after she has a hemorrhage. And after that, some time passes. Joan unfortunately passes away after helping her. Some time passes after this again, and Buddy visits. They're both grieving, and Dr. Nolan assures that no one is at fault. And more time passes, and Esther is about to leave the asylum, and all things are starting to look positive for her. She starts to feel a little bit better, and she enters the room awaiting her interview, and she says that she's confident.
Okay. Yeah. So, The Bell Jar is before even getting into it. In my mind, I had already thought, just from the things that I'd heard about it and the little that I knew about it, that it was essentially Catcher in the Rye, but
Woman.
a woman instead. And I would say for the first half, that's pretty spot on. The first half where she's in New York, and she's engaging with a lot of fake people and fake friends and
Phonies.
yeah, and phonies and boys being fake and the company giving them gifts and all that stuff, right? Um, but there is kind of a different element, I think, from Holden, because Holden um, is sort of has already kind of squandered whatever potential he did have, because he does seem to be kind of a smart kid. He just throws school away, basically.
Doesn't apply
She,
himself.
right, she on the other hand does apply herself, to the point that it's all she feels like she can do. And so, you get kind of I would say, um, an extra aspect to it, outside of just a woman finding her way in the
Mhm.
world, is also trying to live up to that potential of someone who's always been very good in school, at her studies. Um, the second half, I think, when you put the book together, I think it sort of synthesizes Catcher in the Rye along with one of J.D. Salinger's other works,
Mhm.
called Franny and Zooey, where um, one of the characters has essentially a mental breakdown after sort of recognizing how phony the world is. Um, so the first half is Holden Caulfield, Catcher in the Rye. The second half is I'm breaking down.
Mhm.
The world is not right for this or that reason.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I thought it was pretty good,
So
pretty
did I.
pretty good.
Pretty good. I don't know if I would call it one of my favorites, but I think it was very much like I could see why this would be someone's favorite book, and I do see
Mm-hmm.
why it had the impact that it had because one, the autobiographical aspect makes this book a little bit more enticing, especially with her unfortunate and untimely death soon after the publication of this book. A lot of this book is very autobiographical. And two, I just think it is very well written. She had like a poet's attention to detail, even like the most minute descriptions, and there's some beautiful metaphors in the book, such as the fig tree and her seeing her life. And I don't know, this book also really opened an avenue in about discussing mental health, and I also really loved that too. Um, I don't know if you have anything else to contribute to that, just that general statement.
Um, I don't think so. Sorry, I was also reading a note here about adaptations of the Bell Jar that kind of fell through. Not
I can
important. I just had not
yeah.
read that before this point. Um, but yeah. I will say, coming into it, when I was first reading the first part, I said, oh, I knew this was similar to
Mhm.
Catcher in the Rye, and you made a joke that was like, I don't remember her saying phony that often. Um, but if you pull from the book itself, there's a ton of parallels,
Mhm.
in the first part. They're both kind of, young people on the precipice of another part of life, where Holden is a junior in high school, um, who hasn't applied himself in school and doesn't know what he's going to do. Esther is a junior in college who has applied herself at school, still isn't sure what she's going to do in kind of a different way. Um, they both end up wandering around New York. Um, and there are sections of the book, where I think it gets really close to basically calling things phony. I know I took a picture of the section where she's talking about Technicolor and hating how, um, in Technicolor movies everybody feels the need to wear like this super colorful thing, and we have to see a
Mhm.
shot of the ocean, and it's all set up not because, like, this is how life is, but because they want to show off the color of in the film.
Interesting. Yeah.
Um, she gets really close to saying the word phony there, but she doesn't do it. Um,
Copyright.
they are also both virgins obsessed with the idea of sex, for
Mhm.
portions of the book, um, and we see Esther get there technically,
Mhm.
and we Holden doesn't, but they're also, she's older than he is.
Like, yeah,
Um,
tinge older.
yeah. Um, but yeah, there's lots of other things. I'm not gonna read all of
Mhm,
them. I have like a whole list here. There's tons of stuff that you could
mhm,
compare the two. But um I think it's really interesting to make that comparison
mhm.
because of the differences that come with Esther being a woman.
Yeah.
Right, the differences in themes, what we're tackling. They both sort of end up. Now she ends up in an asylum, and we don't really know where Holden is.
Mhm,
But they both end up sort of talking to doctors and therapists and psychiatrists and stuff eventually because of
mhm,
the way that they see the world. But we get more of that break for Esther,
mhm.
which I think is interesting.
Yeah. I also might want to add that those parallels, while they are there, I don't think were too intentional. I mean, I'm kind of leaning to the fact that this was based on her own personal experiences of like going to an asylum and receiving electrotherapy. Um,
I sort of disagree because
okay.
we see in her journals that she talks about the heroine from her novel
Hmm.
as a separate from herself. She's pulling on real experiences, obviously, and
Hmm.
probably lived through a lot of that. But um, I don't know. The internal voice reminds me of Holden 100%.
Interesting.
The especially in that first half,
Hmm.
and the events run extreme like the comparisons that you can make run extremely close together.
Honestly,
Um,
I'm just
and
yeah.
and part of that might be because maybe she loved Catcher in the Rye that much. We know from her journals she liked Holden Caulfield's voice.
Hmm.
Um, I've been saying Holden, right? I'm like,
Yeah, it's Holden Caulfield. Yeah.
yeah. Well, no, I know what it is. I'm just making sure that I've been saying that and not like blanking and saying something else. Um,
Okay.
okay, yeah. She we know from her journals that she really liked Holden's voice, the way that
Hmm.
the way that he spoke and thought in his book. Um, and so maybe she's just carrying some of that character over into her own experiences with
Hmm.
Esther and all that. But
You
um,
know, I am also kind of noticing also a bit of a parallel. I don't know how I mean, I love this trope. But they also have a central metaphor where the title comes from Catcher in the Rye, the
yeah,
bell jar. Well, the
true.
bell jar is more of just like a symbol that keeps on appearing, a motif, while the Catcher in the Rye has this one big paragraph about his dream about being like in the wheat field, right? And then
Yeah,
catching
yeah, yeah.
anyone that falls. Something like
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Um, yeah, that's interesting. I think I think what we should maybe do is because I mean I could talk about how the critiques of society as
Hmm.
well. But I think what's most interesting about it is the differences be again because she's a woman in society,
Hmm.
the expectations on her, and then also the differences because of the different wants for to
Hmm.
what to do with the rest of their lives. Um, I think the easier one to discuss, we'll discuss it first, is the wants for the rest of their life, the potential that Esther has
Hmm.
because of the fig tree analogy in the book,
Or the metaphor.
or
What?
metaphor, analogy, metaphor,
Yeah,
part of
metaphor.
speech.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, what did you
Trying to
think
pull up
about
that
the
quote.
the the fig tree?
Um, that's I okay. For a central metaphor, I at first my first time reading it in 2019, many moons ago, I thought it was interesting. Mostly because of the fact that the branches are representing life and the path she could take. And at that age, at the age of 19, I believe is when she started feeling this way. It's when you start to notice that doors are starting to close and that the opportunities you have yesterday may not be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pull up the passage as well, but
I have it. So she talks about her life branching out before her, like the green fig tree in the story. From the tip of every branch, like a fat purple fig, a wonderful future beckoned and winked. Then she describes a few of the futures that she could have with different lovers and different jobs and the Olympics and being a poet and so on. And then she says, I saw myself sitting in the crotch of this fig tree, starving to death, just because I couldn't make up my mind which of the figs I would choose. I wanted each and every one of them, but choosing one meant losing all the rest. And as I sat there, unable to decide, the figs began to wrinkle and go black, and one by one they plopped to the ground at my feet.
hmm, yep.
Um,
I think that fig tree metaphor also does encapsulate like I mean, obviously, aside from the bell jar metaphor, which I think is probably more appropriate, um, she
Well,
does feel
that's
paralyzed.
for her. That's for her. I feel like that's for her mental health struggles, which
Yeah, that
we'll
is
get
true.
to.
We'll get there. We'll get
I wanted to talk about this because I think it's easy to talk about because
there.
there's such a specific passage,
Mhm,
and because that specific passage is so famous. Like I'd heard this
mhm,
passage before reading this book.
yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, essentially, it is just her because she has potential and she
Hmm.
is afraid of squandering it, and the opportunities are not there. And she kind of beats her own drum as well because she does not get along with a lot of her cohort or peers. She kind of stands out one because she was really tall. I think they described that in the book a bit because there was one man that was just like much shorter. She did not like short people or Asians
Yeah,
apparently.
I was like, I was like, oh no, she hates short men. Oh, it's like, now he seemed pretty sleazy as well,
Yeah,
just like
yeah.
in general, but she was really going after him because he was short for some reason. Yeah,
Representation
and
in this book.
and I think you know, we're both young adults. And you know, it gets to a certain point in college where you've kind of decided your path and there's still a few avenues open to you. But you know, coming out of high school, everything was open. Everything was possible. You know, you just had to decide what you wanted to do. Um, and just the act of deciding makes everything else kind of go away. And I don't think it really hits you um, until at least probably you're almost done with college. Once you get into the more specific stuff in your major, um,
Hmm.
that you've kind of for all the potential that you as a young person who did was smart enough and did well enough in school to go to college, all that potential that you had is now manifesting in a specific future, and it's sort of
Hmm.
closing off all the other opportunities you could have had you made a different choice. And it is, I could see why it would be paralyzing.
Hmm.
It's something that I've thought about and not necessarily been paralyzed by, but you know, concerned. What if I did want to do something else? What if I would be happier doing something else? Um, so it's I think it's interesting. High schoolers are reading this book now. So
Yeah.
I think it's
Well,
interesting for them
be
to think
banned
about
somewhere.
for their future. Probably banned somewhere. That's true. For them to think about for the future, and also for us as people who are now past this age to
Hmm.
think about. I kind of get a similar feeling for her as I get for Holden nowadays. That like I'm beyond that age, and I just feel kind of bad. You know, they're kind
Yeah.
of naive young people. Obviously, Esther goes through some more stuff that we'll get into. Um,
Mhm.
but especially that first half of the book, I was like, I feel exactly the same as with Holden. I feel bad because she's sort of naive and is trying to fit the world into kind of
Mhm.
her preconceived notions, and it just doesn't work like that. And she'll hopefully learn that eventually. But
Mhm.
anyways,
Yeah.
anyhow.
Yeah. But very well said. Probably said it better than way I could have. The way that Sylvia Plath does describe these feelings so real and also so matter of factly, I was very much surprised by it. There are some very purple prose and some metaphors, but Um, s- she was not afraid to make the protagonist, and I think this is where the separation comes from. Because at the beginning of the book, she is kind of rude, and I don't know how much of it is her fictionalizing her beliefs or placing her beliefs onto the character. But she is a little bit rude, and it wasn't afraid of making sure that this character was distinct enough from her own, where you could like this character or could not. But not that excuses anything that goes on in the second book, second half of this book.
Hmm.
Um, and also, I really like how this book is structured because it is everything that is planted in the first half of this book, where it is just a series of vignettes, where it does kind of culminate into a midpoint where she has all these minor setbacks, where it becomes like the death of a thousand paper cuts, where it culminates into her being depressed, and it's very random. Not very random. It's not unexpected entirely out of the blue, but it gradually becomes something more sinister and insidious and hits her very much so and knocks her down. And that is some brilliant writing, I would say.
Yeah. Um, I will also and then I want to also kind of move into uh the role of a woman, I
Mhm,
guess, for her. She essentially is sort of a figurehead, I guess, for the time, for a lot
mhm,
of kind of changing attitudes that a lot of them have been sort of changed at this point, by and large, not for all people, of course.
mhm,
um, but just that, um, women. She wants to be kind of a self-sufficient woman. She doesn't want to just be the doctor's wife, right? But it kind of
mhm,
expects her to just sort of become his wife, first and foremost, before whatever else she's planning on doing. Um, and that's not really what she wants for herself. She wants to
mhm,
kind of set her own way and her own path. Um, and then I also think that she the other thing that she sort of tackles, is the idea of purity, and this attitude honestly hasn't changed enough today. The idea that women kind of need to be pure,
mhm.
and men don't.
Yeah.
That there's something more inherently good or different at all about male and female virginity, um,
Mhm.
and purity. Uh,
Yeah.
she points out that it doesn't make any sense to her,
Mhm.
and I mean it doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah. Especially in Buddy Willard, who is a walking
Mhm.
contradiction.
Yeah.
I think that you don't know much about Buddy Willard except of how shallow he is. Um, they're going steady. Everybody wants to be with Buddy, but he chooses Esther, even though they don't really have a great relationship. And when they're talking, Buddy mentions that he hooked up with this waitress, and that kind of sets Esther into this spiral of jealousy, going like, "Why do you have to be so? You lied to me. You weren't very pure, and why do you have this expectation onto me?" And also, I think this happens later on in the book, but I think it's also worth mentioning is that Buddy also dismisses her poetry. He
Yeah.
says it's like dust in the wind. It doesn't really matter, which
Um.
that must have hurt.
Yeah. 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 Uh. And I think it's also notable that Buddy sort of uh man, I lost track of my thought. It's gone like dust in the wind. Um. Um.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
literally like dust in the wind. My bad. My bad.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Buddy is just a jerk. He somehow gets around, and he is
Mm.
that guy that everybody wants to be with. And I think there's
Yeah.
another thing that
So
contrasts him: science and arts.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I literally I just remember what I was trying to say. Buddy to me, every time I sort of read him, and I think this might also be part of sort of Esther's limited point of view, right? Like Buddy is going to be a doctor, right? Like we know
Mhm,
that he's probably generally intelligent.
mhm,
Um, but reading from Esther's point of view, Buddy feels like a guy who doesn't really think about anything
yeah,
except what he has going on. Like that's
mhm,
all that literally his entire mental space is filled with like what's happening for me. He doesn't have any much room for anybody else,
mhm,
or their thoughts or their feelings or considerations about things outside of himself. Um, and he does seem like a selfish guy for sure.
yeah,
Um, but I do also think it's kind of notable that we're at a very limited point of view as well, because he is probably intelligent
mhm.
to
Just
some
not
extent.
emotionally intelligent.
But yeah, not emotionally intelligent, right? He seems like the kind of guy who doesn't really consider other
Mhm,
people very much. He's sort of airheaded when it comes to um, considerations outside of his own mental state and the
mhm,
things that he wants.
yeah. And I think there's also with Dr. Gordon, and how Esther is looking at him. And I think it was a male doctor and he was handsome, but he also just like kind of ignores what he has to say. Like not ignores intentionally, but he kind of just doesn't listen to what he has to say. And I don't think that the doctor really cares either. He just prescribes electrical consult ECT. I'm just gonna call it ECT. ECT, and it makes her feel even worse than she did before. And I think that was just he didn't consider her feelings or anything about it. Just wanted to prescribe her something to get the SADs away.
Well, and he also apparently messes it up according
Oh, damn.
to the later, because it hurts, right? It hurts her,
Yeah.
and then and she goes to the second place and she doesn't want to do
Mhm.
it, but the doctor's like, it's not. He screwed up.
Huh.
It should be like you're going to sleep and then you wake back up, um, or whatever it was. But it's much more pleasant. I still think okay. I still think based on the described symptoms of ECT, if they're accurate to Sylvia Plath's you know, when she had it done, probably are still they don't seem good to me. I don't know if getting the sads away is worth what Esther describes as like
Mhm.
thoughts literally slipping away from her. Um, I don't know if that's worth that.
Yeah.
If that's accurate to Plath's same side effects after having it done to her.
That is also why it opens up in such a strange way. The book, the entire book in chapter one, it opens up with it was a queer sultry summer, the summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs, and I didn't know what I was doing in New York. I'm stupid about executions. The idea of being electrocuted makes me sick, and that's all there was to read about in the papers. Goggle-eyed headlines staring up at me on every street corner and at the fusty, peanut-smelling mouth of every subway. It had nothing to do with me, but I couldn't help wondering what it would be like being burned alive all along your nerves. Which I guess it's supposed to be a sense of irony that it ends up saving her, quote unquote, at the end,
Mhm.
through ECT. In the middle, not so much. It is what kind of I don't want to say kills her, but like kind of makes it worse. So I think the Rosenbergs were the central metaphor because they also got electrocuted. Even though many people were like, "Hey, I I think Eisenhower could have granted them clemency, but he didn't."
Yeah. Well, they thought that they were I think
Communists.
the Rose yeah, they were communists. But I think the Rosenbergs actually are also a really good metaphor for I just thought about this, for the larger some of the larger themes about womanhood and relationships with men in general.
Mhm,
Because if you know the history of them, in the evidence we found after their death that people have gone through and picked through, I mean, maybe she knew about it, but we don't have any hard connection between the wife and
mhm,
the Soviets or communism. We do have some connections between the husband and communism. Uh, so maybe she was also a communist. Maybe she also shared those connections and just didn't write a lot down. But it seems like the only one we would have evidence to have actually, convicted of anything would have been the husband, but the
Mhm.
wife was killed anyways. Um,
That was good. That was a good
so I
point.
think I think that's actually notable. I didn't think about this until you reminded me of the Rosenbergs from the beginning of the
Just
book.
back and forth. Yeah, that's what we're here for. Yeah. Um, I actually don't have anything else to say about the first half because I think we're just unintentionally dividing the book into two halves. The mother was
It's
supportive.
yeah, yeah. Um, Yeah, but the mother also wanted to fit her into a
Oh,
sort of
yeah,
womanly box as
yeah,
well. She wanted her to
because
learn
yeah,
shorthand and and
shorthand.
and take after men in business, right? And
Mm,
and write down their notes and letters and all that.
that is
Um
true.
yeah. So she's supportive, but she's also doing something that is sending Esther further
Regressive.
into
Yeah.
her depressive state.
Mm,
Um we mentioned the bell jar metaphor a couple times. uh she's sort of being
Muffed it into
suffocated,
yeah.
smothered under it. um and you can see her when feeling moments of clarity, when she feels like it gets lifted away from her.
Mhm.
um it could
It appears a lot.
be, yeah. um it could be a couple different things. Mental illness in general. It
Mhm,
could be suburban life, right? Like
mhm,
we don't get, yeah, she has problems in the city, but we don't get as much like the this motif until she moves back to the suburbs with her mom.
mhm,
um and then it could also just be all the stuff we've been talking about expectations for women,
mhm,
and how that is fight, like the need to kind of push against those is probably suffocating and depressive for some women, especially women 70 years ago, when it
mhm.
was even more so. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think it even mentions about, like, how you're breathing the same air in the bell jar
Mhm.
over and over again, so it just kind of feels all stale, and she wants to get out, but really can't because the entire world is just encased in this tiny little thing. All right,
um but yeah, I
second
mean,
half. Oh,
yeah, we could do the second half. I thing is, I feel like I had more to say overall than about the
how
second
about the
half,
first
but
half?
maybe you can start, and I'll follow if there's something I'd like to add.
I will just say, yeah, I mean, I know that this supposedly the most interesting part of the book. This is the part I remember the most, but honestly, upon rereading it for the second time, I gotta say that the first half a little bit more interesting. Not because it wasn't boring. It's just damn. It's going through routines. I'm not criticizing the way it's written. More so just about my lack of engagement in it because I can relate
Yeah.
with the suffocating of suburbia and expectations. I have not, thankfully, I have not. I can't relate to being in an asylum. I could empathize with the fact that she feels like a disappointment to her mom, and I love how the staff was very supportive. I expected it to be like one flew over the cuckoo's nest, where the staff was just like riding her hard and making her do stuff, but no. All she wants to do is some occupational. She keeps on missing out on occupational therapy, but she keeps on engaging in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um.
I didn't find the sort of depressive cycle the most engaging. I thought it was
Mhm,
um most enjoyable when she was kind of going around New York making
mhm,
observations about the people around her are, and that
mhm,
kind of thing. Um Obviously I think the second half is important. The idea is
mhm.
the effects that
Yeah.
the world and life can have on people,
Mhm.
dependent upon who they are, the expectations upon
Yeah.
them, et cetera, et cetera.
Etc.
um but so I think it's important,
Mhm.
but I thought it was less engaging. I enjoyed
Yes.
reading it less, and not it.
Uh.
I didn't even not excuse me. I
Relate.
didn't even not enjoy it. I just enjoyed it less.
Yeah.
I still thought it was
Uh,
good.
Yeah, and as someone who is gonna be working in healthcare and probably might and whose field is gonna be relevant to this, I did empathize with it more. I now see the importance. It's just, I just empathize with the societal aspect of it more. I will say though that Joan was an interesting character to have come back because we start to learn more about her, especially about the fact that it took me 2 reads, and it wasn't until, like, reading it afterwards that surprised me, even though how explicit it was that Joan was a lesbian. Even though they supposedly had a couple paragraphs dedicated to that, I was just like, "Oh, they must be really good friends, even though they're lying in bed."
There
Gaydar is not
was,
my thing.
and they were roommates, and
Yeah.
they were roommates. Um,
I've got bad gaydar, is what I am saying.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's interesting too, and it's especially interesting, I guess, in part because of sort of the conversation that she has with her doctor shortly
Mhm,
after about sort of the freedom that men have when it comes to not having children, and also sort of the fact that she finds Joan kind of weird. She finds her
mhm,
weird, but Joan is also able to sort of live a um, more sexually free,
mhm,
sexually liberated lifestyle
mhm,
than Esther would be able to. Something that Esther supposedly yearns for. She told her doctor,
mhm,
which she then got went and got birth control. Um,
mhm.
a birth control form I didn't even know that much about because it's not really done anymore as much.
Yeah. I
Now
was
it's
surprised that
all
was being done
hormone
in the
based.
50s? In the
Yeah,
50s too,
right. Well,
it seems to me.
yeah, yeah. Well, the pill had not been popularized so much yet, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, that this was the first thing that she went for when writing about her going to get birth control.
Mhm.
Um,
I was yeah. And, I liked her not her adventures. I mean, so her
yeah,
sexual
sorry.
encounter
The pill first is first approved in 1960. I had to look that up just to
huh,
because I was thinking about it. Yeah, so the if this is the 50s, the pill is not even out yet. That's why she's she goes and gets this other form of birth control.
huh, that is interesting. Um, what was I saying? Yeah, and it leads to her having a sexual encounter with a stranger, um, which I guess was a thing that, well, assuming it wasn't really common with women to do that in the 50s, but he does it with a man named Irving, a math professor at a good school who is not the most handsome man, but she picked him out because he seemed intelligent. And when that happens, she has a bit of hemorrhaging that Joan starts to clean up. I'm trying to struggle what that symbolizes, but I think that's just her an actual just bad experience. She's so unexperienced with it that it leads to something bad. But I think later in the book it said like the chances of that happening are very rare.
Yeah.
So
Well, there's also a lack of consideration from sort of
perfect.
Irving. Yeah. He doesn't really like he just thinks it's normal, you know, she was
Oh
a
yeah,
virgin and
that's what. Yeah.
pop the cherry and bleed a little. He thought it was normal, and because I think part because he treated it like it was normal, she was like, okay, let me just hide it until it goes away,
Yeah. Her
and
slave
that's
to
why she
cancer
doesn't
essentially.
get help until she gets to Jones, and then Joan, of course, supports her. Um,
Yeah.
something about the support women can get from each other versus
Yeah.
from men. I'm not one hundred
Yeah.
percent sure.
I don't think it really symbolizes anything. I think it may have happened, and that was just her describing it. I don't know. I don't wouldn't look so much into it as into this abstract thing.
Justin, where you gotta assume intentionality in art,
I gotta
man. You
assume, yeah.
gotta if you see something and you're like, I think this might stand for that. You gotta assume
You
intentionality
gotta
that
hammer it down.
the artist could have intended that we don't
Mhm.
know, so we can just
Okay.
make that connection.
Make that connection.
Sorry,
That'll work.
I'm
Yeah.
grandstanding. I'm grandstanding, but
Okay.
I listen. I teach school. I teach students now, and these teenagers, they don't know how to look at art. I'm teaching them about political cartoons, and I'm like, this is all intentional. Look at it. They're saying something. Please tell me what they're saying. Sorry, I'm grandstanding about. Yeah.
Someone clip that.
Anyways.
Someone clip that. Put that. Yeah. Um, and then Joan's unfortunate suicide after that too, which I thought was glossed over really quickly. It just happens, and then
Yeah, it
uh,
feels like it comes out of nowhere a little bit. And I think it's because of, again, Esther's pretty limited point of view.
mhm.
Um and she also, again, she thinks she's kind of weird. She's
Yeah.
like pushing her away a lot of the time. So we don't really get to know Joan that much until right before she commits suicide.
Hmm.
Um but yeah, it kind of it there's probably some hints that I didn't pick up
Yeah.
on, but it felt like it came out of nowhere a little bit, and then they're just
Hmm.
like, "It's nobody's fault."
Yeah. I just I guess that's one criticism of the book I'll have because this happens right before the happy chapter. Like it's the penultimate chapter. It's there, and then at the final chapter, it's like, yeah, all signs point towards me getting out of this asylum. I just thought the placement of that chapter was just a bit strange, or that moment, because it doesn't give you much time to grieve, and it does really happen out of nowhere. So I don't know, but I did like the ending. I like how ambiguous. Well, it really isn't ambiguous, but I like how it ended, as to like an optimistic note as to Esther getting released because she quote unquote sees optimism. She feels better, and all signs point towards the doctors approving of her dismissal. Um, and reflecting, and in real life, Sylvia Plath was planning on making a sequel to this book or a spiritual sequel about someone living life um, after being in an asylum or something like that, like living a life in good health. Is supposed to be a contrast to this. Unfortunately, that did not happen due to her untimely death. Um, so
Yeah.
it kind of puts a dour note on this happy ending that was supposed to happen.
Yeah, and I also sort of didn't see the happy ending coming. There's some references to, like, if I'm remembering correctly, there's a couple references to like windows. And I was remembering, um who was it? Was it Virginia Woolf that committed suicide by jumping out of a window? Or am I
I do
misremembering?
not remember, but it could be
Um,
an illusion. If you're remembering it, it has to be ingrained to our culture somehow that some famous author died by suicide after jumping from a great height.
if you, oh, sorry, she drowned herself. Okay, never mind. My bad. I swear there's some, um there I'm, again, maybe I'm mistaken. It
Mhm.
felt like foreshadowing to me, in some
Oh.
sense. The references to the window,
Mhm.
um, because that is a way that I know some women did commit suicide, jumping out the window. I I'm floundering because I swear I remember this,
Mm.
but the person I connected it to in my head, it wasn't true.
Mhm.
So, uh, yeah.
Mhm.
Anyways, it just felt like the repeated, she kept referencing the window, and
Like a red herring?
yeah,
Or
I felt like we were in for a very sad ending, and then obviously that didn't end up
yeah.
panning
It's just
out.
I'm guessing because the preceding chapter was, again, talking about Joan's death, and, you would expect for it to impact Esther just a bit more and lead her to not get out of the asylum and or fail her, or perhaps meet a tragic end, but it ends optimistically, almost abruptly, but, I'll take the happy ending where I can.
I
I
got
think
it. I got it. I got it. Virginia Woolf did attempt to throw herself out of a window.
wow.
Yeah. That's not how
Yeah.
she died, but that's not
Okay.
the thing that killed her. But that was one of her attempts. And it's quite a famous one because one of the characters in I believe Mrs. Dalloway does it as well.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
That is a fact.
Yeah, I'm just saying
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where I pulled that parallel from. I'm sure Sylvia Plath was probably, if I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I if she was a fan of modernist literature, I assume she was probably a fan
Oh.
of Virginia Woolf,
Yeah.
and so she would be, she would know about this. So in that way, maybe I know we were just talking about artist intention. Maybe the window red herring was intentional. Um, Perhaps.
May as well.
I'm
Yeah.
spitballing. I'm
Yeah.
floundering. I'm trying to make up for
Grasp
me
correction. Yeah.
for me making up in my head that she
Yeah.
died by jumping out a window.
Okay. Yeah. Um. What was I saying? Oh yeah. Before in this happy little chapter, she does tell off Buddy Willard. One, she rejects his hand in marriage, and but at the end they kind of make up because it's snowing and she helps out Buddy cleaning up his car from the
Hmm.
snow and everything, and the doctor does reassure him, "Hey, it's not your fault. It's not your fault." And Esther, especially, it is not your fault. So that was a nice little note, I guess, to end on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and I guess that's all I really have to say about that. Oh, I also love the repeating phrase "I am, I am, I am." It sounds cheesy, but like it does work in the novel's favor because I wouldn't say cheesy, but like it's simple, but it's also profound. It's like a symbol of resilience in a
Yeah.
way.
Uh,
And she says it
and
before.
yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
She says it before when she's about to drown herself, attempted to drown herself. Um, she hears her heartbeat going, "I am, I am, I am," which I think that was her body's way of fighting back against her own thoughts, and that was her own mind recognizing that as well. So,
Yeah. Um, I think that yeah, there I don't have too much more to say about this either. I don't think that there really is like a ton to say about things like this,
mhm,
coming of age novels to some extent, because they are just kind of about the character, dealing with some aspect of becoming an adult or life
mhm,
or what have you. Um, but I think like as I get older, I remember being a teenager and a very young adult and reading these books and being like, oh, this speaks to me on some level, um, and it still does. They still do, but there's another part of me that now that I'm a little bit older is starting to feel bad because there
mhm,
are realizations that I came to that I would expect that the characters in this book, if they were real, would come to eventually if they just held off and waited a little bit longer before um, you know, um, freaking out about the fig tree, right? Like make a decision,
yeah,
and you'll come to some realizations later. You're a little bit naive still. You're not thinking about this correctly, I don't think. Just give it time. Uh, yeah, there's a part of me that sort of feels bad for Holden
empathize.
Caulfield and
Yeah,
Esther and all them, just because they're dealing with life without having lived long enough to understand the situations they're dealing with.
mhm,
Um, and yeah, that's just I'm rambling a bit, but I feel like that's
yeah,
just something you sort of understand about these characters as you yourself get older. Sort of
yeah.
changes your perspective on their thoughts and feelings and emotions.
Yeah. And it makes you appreciate the book in a different way. Because
Hmm.
I read this when I was in the midst of college, and now I have graduated college. I'm not taking the board exam to get my job yet, but that is besides the point. I think I've gained some perspective as to
Hmm.
the responsibility that you have as a young adult in college compared to as an adult. And it comes with experience, and fumbling around. I I like to think that this book could help inspire someone to get some help or if they need it. And I believe that this book has also really opened up the dialogue about mental health, not just within females, but also within males as well, which is also very important. And
Yeah, uh,
that's all I've got to really say about it.
yeah. A huge part of it is, yes, a huge part of it is about kind of being women in society, but the part
Mhm.
about potential and your future, I think any young person can relate to. Um, so yeah.
I actually don't have anything else to add. That is
Nope.
really
Nope.
the end of my
I
notes
think
as well.
we've covered most of it. There's probably some minor things we might be missing, but I think we covered all the
Yeah.
major stuff.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, with that, um, we are sort of shifting some things once again.
You
But
keep on doing
but
that.
yeah, don't worry. Things are being settled. We're moving into. We decided to kind of shift our movie episodes a little bit again, and we're moving into now. We're going to tackle the Criterion Collection, not one by one. We're gonna pick and
Yeah.
choose stuff that we want to see, stuff that we're excited about is, I think,
N-
the
Not Miss
main
Jolie.
thing. Yeah. We noticed we were gonna do the Palme d'Or. We noticed there were huge patches that we were not. Yeah, we'll watch them, but we're not excited to really talk about
It
them.
was several movies in a
Um,
row.
yeah. So with this, we can still get that prestige while also picking things that we're excited about. So this first month, April, will be John Cassavetes. Um,
A
what is it?
Woman Under the
What's the full
Influence.
title? A
A
Woman Under
Woman
the
Under the
Influence.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember the full title. A Woman Under the Influence. It gets picked in Criterion Closet videos quite often, and we are both very curious. So we'll see. And then next month we'll be reading. Are we officially reading?
Yep. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by
Yep.
Philip K. Dick.
I'm excited to check out some more sci-fi.
Yeah.
Every time I've read it, I enjoy it a little bit more. And with that, you can find us on Twitter, on YouTube, kind of on TikTok. We haven't posted there in a while. Not just
Delete it
any
off our
pod.
phone. Yeah.
Not just any pod. Um, Please give us a like, rating, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're on.
Yeah. Comment, interact with us, make us happy. If
Yep.
you're watching this video right now, the chances are you found it in the algorithm. So if you could also share it with someone else, because our social media game is not exactly great. So
Yeah. We would truly appreciate it. And I think
yeah.
that's about it.
Yep. Goodbye, Prometheus.